This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Tonight, I promise you, it's a UKIP-free zone. We're not going into that soap opera, which is still playing out today, and will go on doing so until the extraordinary general meeting, which has been announced today, will take place on the 17th of February in Derby. There'll be more of that between now and then. No, it's not UKIP tonight. Tonight, we're discussing a much longer running soap opera, one that is equally dramatic, one with a series of twists and turns, and one that we woke up this morning to see that ahead of a cabinet meeting, a senior, very senior minister, in fact the Foreign Secretary's friends had briefed that he would go in to that cabinet meeting fighting for an extra £100 million a week to be given to the National Health Service. Who am I talking about? Well, of course, it's Boris Johnson, isn't it? Now, Boris, when it comes to giving money to the National Health Service as a result of our leaving the European Union, has a little bit of form. You might remember that red coach that went around the country saying, we give the European Union £350 million a week, let's fund our NHS instead. Just to remind you, here's Boris during the referendum.
If we vote leave on June the 23rd, we can take back control of £350 million a week and spend on our priorities here in this country, including on the National Health Service.
Well, I always thought that figure was absolutely stone bonkers, because that figure was the gross figure. And yes, sure, we do account for it in our Treasury figures, but that was before the British rebate, the one won by Margaret Thatcher, although reduced significantly by Tony Blair, and didn't take into account the money that comes back, albeit spent at the EU's behest. Had he used a figure of a couple of £100 million a week, it wouldn't have been arguable. But he's never, ever back down from that. And indeed, on Good Morning Britain, well after the referendum, he was asked whether he stood by the original claim.
The net contribution is about £10 billion a year. 350 million, as I explained, until I was blue in the face last year. That is what the UK contributes to the
Do you still stand by
EU
that
budget.
then, Boris?
I do, of course I do.
So there's Boris, and actually, you know, for 20 years, I've talked about an independence dividend. The fact we would not be giving a net £10 billion a year to the European Union, and that's now been called the Brexit dividend by Boris, and indeed at times by the Prime Minister as well. So an extraordinary situation that going into a cabinet meeting, friends of Boris have briefed he's going to be fighting for this figure. Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, he said, look, no Health Secretary is ever not going to support potential extra resources for the NHS. The Chancellor, or Phil, well, he said, look, I've already given an extra £6 billion to the NHS and there is no more money. And others have commented on this. And I mean, for example, Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times says, Boris knows his legacy will be defined on whether the NHS receives £350 million a week. Well, he wasn't fighting for £350 million a week, but he was fighting for £100 million a week when Britain leaves the European Union. Now, we're on track and on course, allegedly, to leave the European Union at midnight on at 11 o'clock, it's midnight Brussels time, at 11 o'clock on March the 29th next year. So what I'm asking you is this pledge to give the NHS an extra £100 million a week once we leave the European Union, is it a sincere desire of Boris's, or is it pure political opportunism? And if you think, of course, Boris is always absolutely 100% genuine and sincere in all that he does, then you can call me on 0345 60 973 if you think maybe it's just Boris yet again on leadership manoeuvres, then text to 84850, or maybe you think as Foreign Secretary he ought to simply stick to foreign affairs, and if you want to comment on that, then you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course you can watch me on Facebook and comment there too. Is Boris sincere, genuine, or has he seen, and by the way, for the last 6 months on this show, I've been saying she's useless. Mrs May can't run the country. There's no sincerity, there's no passion, there's no warmth, there's no humour. She doesn't even believe in Brexit. And interesting, isn't it? In the last sort of 48 hours, we've had people like Nick Bowles saying that she's timid. We've had Nick Soames, I mean, one of the arch Remainers, even Nick Soames, being very, very critical of the Prime Minister, her lack of passion, her lack of sincerity. I have to say, I think we may be closer to a stalking horse candidate emerging, getting 48 people to give a letter to the chairman of the 1922 committee and a leadership election. She's in trouble. This simply isn't working. And I wonder whether Boris might just have seized upon that opportunity. Or am I simply being too cynical? I'm going to ask Sam from Stoke-on-Trent, a new caller, what he thinks. Sam, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. It's great to speak to you. I saw you when you came to Stoke for the Grassroots Out. I've been an avid follower on YouTube. And
that was
helped with the campaign.
Grassroots Out was a Grassroots Out, to remind those that don't know, was a collection of 18 different political organisations. On the left, we had George Galloway. We even have a new Communist Party of Great Britain, and we moved across the whole spectrum. And I did speak in Stoke. What was the name of the hall I spoke in, Sam? Can you remember?
You spoke in the Victoria Hall.
The Victoria Hall, wonderful old building.
Yeah. Old
Victorian building with a sort of modern bit attached on the side. And I remember that day in Stoke-on-Trent, that night in Stoke-on-Trent, very fondly. And of course, Stoke was a big, big Leave vote, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's the only time Chris Grayling will ever get a standing ovation in Stoke.
Chris Grayling, you're absolutely right, Sam. Chris Grayling, the Conservative Cabinet Minister, Transport Minister, was on a platform in a Labour constituency, got a standing ovation. And you know what? I gave him a lift home that night to Surrey, and he was absolutely stunned to be treated so well in Stoke. Now, the one person, because Kate Hoey was there and others were there, and it was, again, Grassroots Out was a great cross-party organisation. Boris wasn't there, of course, because he was part of the Vote Leave organisation, which was much more a Tory-based thing. But as you know, Sam, very well, you know, he was talking about this $350 million a week, a figure that I felt deeply unhappy with at the time. But when he talks today about, you know, pre-briefs, or his friends pre-brief, ahead of a cabinet meeting about $100 million a week for the NHS, do you think, Sam, first-time caller from Stoke-on-Trent, that he is being absolutely genuine and sincere, or is he after the leadership, Sam?
I think he's an opportunist. I don't know if he really believes in Brexit. I'm not sure. I totally did distrust May. I think she's an absolute disgrace. I think she was a plant. I think she was a backup just in case he lost the referendum. And as soon as she's gone, and we just get someone who actually believes in Brexit. Because if you believe in something, you find a way to make it a success. If you don't believe in something, you're doomed to failure. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure, and I just really am worried after what you said about a second referendum. And I think basically you need to revive the Grassroots Out.
Well, Sam, do you know what?
That needs reviving.
Do you know what? Whether it's called
sooner the better.
Whether it's called Grassroots Out or whatever it's called, I do agree with that. And when I talked, Sam, about a second referendum, it wasn't because I wanted one, because I fear one, because I don't think we have a majority in Parliament for Brexit. So I agree with that. We need a cross-party campaigning group. But what you're saying, and OK, Mrs May, of course she doesn't believe in it. I mean, she couldn't even answer Ian Dale's question, sincerely, a couple of months ago, about whether she'd vote Leave now. But do you still doubt Boris's sincerity on this? I mean, maybe, Sam, I put it to you, the reason he's trying to get some money for the NHS once we've left is he wants to make sure Brexit happens.
Possibly. I'll have to do a little bit of research on him, and I'm just unsure. I think he can do two things. You can hold two things at the same time. If he is going for PM and he's a true Brexiteer, all power to him. But I just worry that he's another cynical member of the political class. I mean, they're taught at Oxford to debate even when they don't believe in something. They're taught to debate issues with passion even if they don't believe in them. So I think I've been tainted by the years and years of political class that don't really say what they believe and will just, follow everything and follow, the masters above, the global finance, the IMF and all that. So I'm a bit worried.
Yep.
I'd love to see, someone who really believes in Brexit, basically. I think, I think David Davis. I like David Davis or Liam Fox.
Yeah, but David Davis is trapped, isn't it? He's piggy in the middle. He's the guy trying to sort of satisfy both wings of the cabinet. Sam, great call. Call again. Some really, really good points. On Twitter, I get from Kieran, I can't believe Farage is accusing Boris of political opportunism. Cheek. Oh, yes, Kieran, I'm an opportunist. I joined a party with about 40 members and spent 25 blooming years campaigning for something that everybody said was impossible. If I was an opportunist, Kieran, I would have joined one of the so-called major parties back in the 1990s. I chose not to do so. Ben is calling from Winchester, another new caller to the Nigel Farage Show. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening, Nigel. I just wanted to talk to you today about Bojo, the man himself.
The man himself.
Well, I think the key thing to remember when talking about Boris is that he's actually really intelligent and often underestimated by the so-called political elite.
Yeah.
I think he's understood that one of the key reasons why the Tories lost their majority in the recent election is the fact that Labour destroyed them completely on the home front, as it were, so on issues about the NHS and public funding. And not only is this, a semi-drive for his aim to be the Prime Minister, but it is also trying to keep the Tory party alive and Jeremy Corbyn out of government by promising all this extra funding.
Ben, if you want to do that, you want to change the agenda and the approach and the appearance of the Conservative Party, what you don't do, I put it to you, is to get your mates to pre-brief it, get it on the front page and turn the cabinet into a bun fight which gives the impression to the country that the party's divided, which makes life even easier for Jeremy Corbyn, doesn't it?
Well, I think the country is fully aware that the cabinet is pretty much divided on every issue.
That's true. All right, I tried.
Yeah, they don't need reminding about that. But he also appeals to a lot of voters that the classic Tories such as Philip Hammond just couldn't appeal to. Well, he won the mayorship of London.
Ben, I couldn't agree with that more. His electoral performance in London was quite astonishing, and I do agree with that. But do you think, Ben, let me ask you, do you think he's sincere in this pledge of 100 million a week for the NHS after March 29 next year, or do you think it's opportunism?
I think it's probably mainly opportunism.
Okay, all right, Ben, I'm going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to move on. I thank you. Ben there thinking it's opportunism, but acknowledging that Boris is very intelligent and the Tory party need to change. If you want to change your party, that was a very odd way of going about it. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's 7:16. So when Boris Johnson's friends brief in the press ahead of a cabinet meeting that he's going to go in there, fists flying, arguing for another £100 million a week for the National Health Service once we've left the European Union at the end of March next year, it does beg the question. Is this absolutely sincere on Boris's part, or is once again he seen to be a political opportunist on manoeuvres, looking to get rid of a weak Prime Minister? And we've seen this pattern before, haven't we? Before major speeches of the Prime Minister, we've seen up to 4,000-word articles appearing in the Daily Telegraph. Now, it's very interesting that the Prime Minister clearly viewed all of this in a pretty dim way, because she told the meeting, preempting Boris, that any Brexit dividend would be allocated according to the government's priorities, including schools and housing as well as health. Shut up, Mr. Johnson. I'm in charge. But now, over the course of the last hour, a whole series of reports are beginning to leak out. Very interesting that Amber Rudd was saying that it was important that the cabinet members were able to trust each other, before adding, I'm talking to you, Foreign Secretary. It's not exactly happy families, is it? Another source said even Michael Gove and co didn't give Boris their full backing. He looked very isolated. And friends of Boris, who've been part of this manoeuvre of pre-briefing this, looking to try and make him a hero, they have said, we ... upped, and we move on. So it actually looks like this whole big early morning thing that I heard at 6 a.m. on the news, that Boris was going to go in there and battle for the Brexit dividend to go to the health service, has pretty much backfired on him within his own cabinet. I have to say, I thought, for somebody as intelligent, and I like Boris a lot. He's fun. He's a force of nature. He's great. He makes politics interesting. When you look at all the dullards that are there, the insipids, those who, frankly, most of the public couldn't recognise half of this cabinet in a lineup. They're so boring. Boris, they can. He's interesting. He's fun. But I thought the 350 million a week in the referendum was a huge mistake. And yes, I'm one of those that thinks he just wants the top job at virtually any cost. Sorry, Boris, if you're listening, but that is what I think. And you can always call in and tell me I'm wrong, but I know that you won't. On Twitter and on text I get, "Hi, Nigel, of course Boris is on manoeuvres. And a good job too, as UKIP is waiting for the hearse," says Pixie. I'm not quite sure of the relevance of that, other than we do need a strong voice for Brexit. And the defence, Pixie, the defence, and I've made it once already tonight, the defence of Boris saying this is, Leave voters do need some persuading that actually going out there and doing it was worth it. And that's not because Brexit's a failure, it's because the government isn't actually implementing it. I agree with Boris. The NHS needs more funding. We should apply a 1% NHS levy on alcohol, tobacco and junk food, says Andrew. So, Andrew, do you want more people to buy backstreet tobacco and backstreet alcohol? When taxes get too high, people avoid paying tax on them. Some estimates suggest that currently on the hand-rolling tobacco market, 80% of tobacco sold in this country is sold on the black market. And having seen Vince Cable in Sky News' studios this morning, I'm reminded he wants a penny on tax to go to the NHS, as Paddy Ashdown before wanted a penny on tax to go to education. We do not have what is called hypothecation of taxes. The fact you pay an extra 1% doesn't go to a certain department. It all goes into the pot. And you know what? Despite the government's claims, we are still running at a £50 billion deficit every single year. My next caller is Barbara from Chichester. Barbara, is he an opportunist, or was he trying to do the right thing to try and make people believe that Brexit will be a good thing?
I think he's not very subtle, is he?
No, not well. At least his friends aren't, are they? I mean, front page of the Times,
He is very impetuous, highly intelligent, but sometimes a bit lacking in common sense. That's the way I see it. And of course, he gets an idea. This will make me look good. This will give the give the public something to hope for and make me look good. And I think that's it. I think there's a bit of both, that he would splash the money around if he given the chance. But of course, that's not the way I work. Just splashing money around. So
but Barbara, when you splash money around, it's your money. When people like Boris want to splash money around, it's your money as well. Absolutely, you preempted me brilliantly. Barbara, let me ask you: do you like Boris?
Well, I do.
You do.
I do quite like him.
And do you think, whatever flaws he may have, and goodness me, we've all got them, but do you think he would make a better Prime Minister than Theresa May?
I'm afraid so.
You're afraid so?
Yes.
Why are you afraid?
I don't think he's ideal.
Right.
But I think that it's just, I can see what's happening with Theresa May, and I don't dislike her, but I can see what's happening.
Support is melting away, Barbara, isn't it?
Yes.
Support is... So, Barbara from
about the second referendum, I realised he didn't want one, but a lot of people just don't seem to understand the subtleties, so I just feel that something might happen. Things are happening, as you know.
Well, Barbara, my feeling is the more timid the Prime Minister is about Brexit and the deal we get, the more the bully boys in Brussels will simply walk all over her, and the more likely it is then that Parliament rejects whatever deal she comes back with, and it's supposed to conclude in October. And I don't want that. I want the smack of firm leadership. I want someone that believes in Brexit. And I'm pondering, would Boris be better than the Prime Minister? You think he would be. And actually, do you know what? However opportunist he may be, I just want someone as Prime Minister that believes in it. Barbara, great phone call. Thank you. Colin is calling from Finchley. Good evening, Colin.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
So, Colin, I'm really cynical, Colin. I'm really cynical. I think I like Boris, But I think this is a cynical manoeuvre. I think he wants the top job. Am I wrong?
Well, no, I think he wants the top job, but everybody calls him a baboon. He's a long way from a baboon, Nigel, because whatever he's doing or does, he does for a motive. Mm-hmm. Everything he does. Mm-hmm. And there's something's in the wind, and I think he's going to go to try to get the top job very soon. Because for any other minister, for the outbreaks that he does, would have got the sack. I think he's got something on her that I don't know what it is, but she just won't sack him. There's got to be a reason. Somebody else would have been out ages ago.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he had ambitions, Colin, after the referendum of going for the top job, but Michael Gove, from beneath a cloak, produced this dagger, and that was the end of him, wasn't it?
Yeah, but then she soon quickly made him Foreign Secretary, didn't she? There must have been a reason why she done that as well. Well,
I think the reason, Colin, is that he does command some quite considerable support amongst the grassroots of the party. And as a previous caller said, the fact that he managed to win, the mayorship in London a couple of times in what is basically a Labour city shows that he does at times have an electoral appeal that reaches out beyond traditional conservatism. The question, Colin, is, do you think he's genuine and sincere about Brexit and money for the health service?
No, I'm not sure. I'm not clever enough to answer that one. There's a motive, and I can't work it out. But it will come to a light very soon.
All right, OK, Colin, we're all watching and waiting, and your comments pouring in. Very, very good tweet here. I don't care what motives Boris has for his request that the NHS receives £100 million a week, just so long as he agitates this government into giving the country what Leavers voted for. And I do completely understand that. In fact, Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a fan of many who follow this show, Jacob has said that at some point, once we're out of the European Union, we're going to have to give £350 million a week. Otherwise, people's expectations will be betrayed. Brexiteers need a leader who believes in leave, agreed. May should never have stood for PM at such a time. The Brexit vote is being drowned out by the moaning, Remainers, whingers, and Boris knows what's going on. So, as ever with Boris, strong passions on either side of the argument. I do actually think he believes in leave, but I do think the way that he's played this today, the way that he's preempted the Prime Minister's speeches, says to me there's someone there that wants the top job. He sees weakness. He now sees all sorts of people like Nicholas Soames, Nick Bowles, even those on the Remain side, now speaking out against the Prime Minister. A stalking horse may not be very far away. I did say back in September, I thought it was 50-50 whether she'd survive by Christmas. Well, she has survived by Christmas, but she's looking no stronger at the end of January than she was before. Somebody else is going to get that top job. Boris is determined it'll be him. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 in time. Boris Johnson gets roundly abused at Cabinet for pre-briefing. He will go into fight for £100 million a week for the National Health Service once we've left the European Union. I'm asking you, is he sincere? Is he the right guy? Is he just an opportunist? Is he going, indeed, for the top job? Other news today, interesting. Lord O'Neill, a former Treasury Minister, a Goldman Sachs economist, and, of course, good friend of George Osborne's, one of those saying to us during the referendum, as part, in fact, one of the chief architects of Project Fear, that we were going down the Swanee if we voted Brexit, has said today that the benefits of global growth in the coming years will easily dwarf any hit from leaving the European Union. So those that were telling us we're headed for poverty, misery and plagues of black locusts are saying, actually, it'll be okay. And a really funny one here that I'm not quite sure at this stage how to interpret. We saw the other day Macron saying that he was going to stop, through social media, fake news twisting the political agenda. Well, the government in this country have announced they will create a new unit to counter fake news and disinformation given by foreign powers. The move to set up a dedicated National Security Communications Unit was agreed by the National Security Council. Well, that all sounds fine and dandy. And, of course, it's all aimed at the fact that we're told that the Russians got Trump elected and the Russians made sure we voted Brexit, and that, of course, yours truly was in the middle of this great spider's web as I ran back and forth information sticks from President Trump to Julian Assange. It's all hooey. And isn't it interesting that both sides of the argument now call something the other side says they disagree with fake news? And in some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't. And I think in a free society, let the press do what they want. Let intelligent people make up their own minds, because actually this is now very, very dangerous indeed, because we could be heading towards some form of state censorship of the internet and free speech, all in the name of stopping fake news. I don't like it. I'm worried about it. I hope it doesn't develop too much. And one quick comment. Do you know, I said to you earlier, I saw Sir Vince Cable this morning, who I like. Very nice man. I mean, deluded politically, but in my view, but he's a very, very nice man. And he was on Sky News talking, as they all do, about the fall in the pound and the impact it had had on this country. And I know there are other LBC shows where they constantly talk about the fall in the pound because of Brexit. And I keep countering by saying, look, if you go back, to 2010, the pound was a lot higher. It's fallen more since 2010 than since the referendum. Well, today, sterling touched 140 against the US dollar, which is higher than its low point, wait for it, before the referendum. Please, Ramonas, stop bleating, stop whinging, stop talking about the fall in the pound. You simply don't know what you're talking about. Pack your bags and go home. We're bored with you. You're wrong. Back to Boris. Mark is calling from Sunbury. Mark, is he sincere in this? Is it the right thing to do, or is it just naked opportunism?
Hello, Nigel. Good to talk to you.
Good evening.
Before that, I was just going to say, where did you find the time to go between Trump and Assange?
Oh, well, I'm a very busy boy. And, of course, don't forget, Mark, given the massive international money that's backing me, I get private jets all around the place every single week.
Of course.
So,
absolutely.
And they're all owned by various Russians with long names, but I better not tell you on... I'll tell you in private over a drink,
Okay, sure.
I mean, just read The Guardian. They'll tell you all this anyway.
Right, back to Boris.
Back to Boris. And by the way, Mark, you're a new caller to the show.
Yes.
Is Boris someone that you feel very strongly about?
I feel strongly about him. I don't think he's prime ministerial material. I really don't see him as being the leader of the party. However, I think he's a very clever man, and I think he's seen an opportunity because as the demographics of this country changes, Nigel, and, everyone's getting older, we need to do something about social services and care. Mm-hmm. And I know we're very sentimental about the NHS as it heads for its 70th birthday, but I think it needs to be renamed the NHSS, National Health and Social Services. And I think Boris is seeing an opportunity for the next election because that will be the main topic that people will vote for. I heard yesterday on Sheila's programme something that really shocked me, that half the councils in this country, half of the 250 councils in this country have now scrapped the Meals on Wheels service. Mm. And we have got millions of elderly people who are starving. Not to death, but starving. They're going without food.
Well, Mark, we have a huge crisis with all of our public services, and I always say that it's a population crisis, that our population is rising by 500,000 a year, and it's very, very tough to catch up. And ageing is a part of this. But Mark, your analysis that it's this that the next general election will be fought on may well be right. Let me ask you this. Is Boris identifying this because he wants the Conservatives to beat Corbyn, or is he seeing a way of positioning himself to be the leader of the Conservative Party at the next election, or perhaps both?
I think that the first one. I think he realises this will be the weakness that the Conservative Party have got to get a grip of. As I say, I don't think he'll get the backing of the party for leadership. I think there's some other contenders. But how interesting that Jeremy Hunt has come out now, after Boris has put his head above the parapet, and said he agrees with him. Why didn't he, as Health Secretary, say, we want the 100 million?
Well, what Hunt said actually was, I don't think any health secretary is ever going to not support potential extra resources for his or her department. So I don't I don't read that, Mark, as wholesome support. But what I also see, Mark, is that, Amber Rudd had a right pop. The Prime Minister tried to preempt him, and even Boris's own supporters said they dotted up. So I don't think today, in terms of political manoeuvring, has been a great success for Boris. Do you?
No, but he's a clever man. And he's a very, very clever man, and I think he's looking to the future. Listen, if the Conservatives don't, get back at the next election, he's out of a job. So I think he's looking for the party's sake. And
OK, all right. No, Mark, thank you. And Mark there from Sunbury saying that Boris actually is being very, very sincere. Shaz says on Facebook, anyone can promise the moon if they know they will never be in a position to deliver. Well, Boris thinks he will be in a position, or he wants to be. Jeanette says, Nigel, I can't understand why May is still there. She's useless. I hope someone puts the cat among the pigeons soon. Jeanette, I sense it's getting closer. I really do. Paul says, whilst Boris's numbers are ambiguous, I feel he is somewhat sincere. However, with a double-edged sword for a leadership punt, well, I think he's up for that punt, and he'd probably make sure that Michael Gove, is locked in a dungeon so that he can't wield that dagger once again. Martin says, I'm not bothered if Boris is PM as long as Jacob Rees-Mogg is there in the cabinet. And Liz says, I think he is sincere. He fronted the campaign that put out that figure, so I bet he'd be able to say that the NHS has started to benefit already. He also wants to be PM, but don't they all? No, Liz, they don't all, but many do. Look, here's my problem with this. If we do leave the European Union on March the 29th next year, we leave the treaty, but we go into this period that Theresa May is desperate to negotiate, this transition period, or as she's rebranded it, this implementation period, we go on for at least that 2-year period paying the same level of membership fees. And to say we're going to have this money free to give the NHS because we've left when we're going on paying the contribution is actually a political and an economic fraud on the taxpayer. I want the independence dividend to be spent on things in this country, and I do think the NHS is a very good way of doing it. But actually, if we do it, next year from April, Boris will be double spending. Mind you, Boris does like spending money. And I get on Twitter, maybe Boris could put the £100 million a week towards his Channel Bridge. He'll need a lot more than that to build that bridge, in my view. David is a new caller from East Finchley. Good evening, David.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to share with you, I'm a Conservative, and I've been to a number of conferences. I was there in 2014.
This sounds like a confessional, David.
No, I still feel good about it. Less good, but still good. Boris, wherever he goes, he is mobbed.
Oh yeah,
he's mobbed. He's like a Hollywood actor. Mm-hmm. People want to touch him. It's almost embarrassing. I think he may like it, but it's embarrassing. It's a good thing for him, and I'm sure that other cabinet members who, no way do they have the same popularity.
David, no one knows who they are.
Unfortunately, outside of circles, I'm sure people wouldn't necessarily recognise them. Some would, but
do you know, David? Do you know, David? In the referendum campaign, with about 3 weeks to go, what you and I would think prominent cabinet minister came into my local pub one morning for a coffee to talk to me, and the landlord and landlady and my staff, all of whom are reasonably aware of current affairs, after he'd left, said, "Who's that geezer? I think I might have seen him before." And this is what you and I would think is a big name. Boris has got that star quality. David, is Boris perhaps the Trump of British politics?
I don't think he's a Trump. He's never going to, break too much with the norm. But I do think that.
But he's a celeb, isn't he?
Well, if obviously Theresa May in July 2016 got elected, got chosen by the Conservative MPs, if it had gone to a vote from members at the 2016 conference, despite the Conservatives being split down the line on Brexit,
yep,
I think he could have won it, just because of who he is and the talk he does.
David, as a paid-up Conservative, do you think your party would have a better chance of beating Corbyn and his momentum campaign if Boris led you into the next election and not Theresa May?
Good question. Actually, I think that Theresa May would probably still win it, because what's happening now...
That wasn't my question.
The Unite, people are going to be aware of what's happening with Unite. They're taking hold of councils, what's happening in
David, we're not talking about the Corbynistas, we're not talking about the hard left, we're not talking about the deselections and all the extraordinary things that are going on in the Labour Party. I'm asking you, as a loyal Conservative, paid-up member, activist, somebody who came on and confessed he'd even attended conferences of this party, would Boris have a better chance of winning the next election than May?
No comment.
No comment. Well, I'm going to comment. He'd have a much better chance of winning the next election than May. And David, a new caller from East Finchley, I thank you for your call and your confessions to an LBC listenership that you've been to Tory party conferences. Gosh, I thought saying you were UKIP was bad. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:47. As Boris tries to bully the Cabinet into £100 million a week extra for the NHS, he gets slapped down for pre-briefing, for being divisive, and for looking, I think, a little bit too ambitious. At least that's how I read it. And before the break, David from East Finchley came on and confessed to us that he was a Conservative Party member. He'd even, in bad moments, been to conferences. He almost felt ashamed of it. Is it any wonder they're losing if that's how they feel? Any of you who are Conservatives and find it difficult to come out can always call 0345 6060 973 under an assumed name. We're happy to talk to you, because I'm not just asking about whether this is sincere or opportunist. I'm also asking, would you have a better chance as a Conservative Party of beating Jeremy Corbyn with Boris as leader rather than Mrs May? And to me, the answer to that, whatever Boris's faults may be, is actually pretty obvious. This guy won in London, which is pretty much a Labour city. So I think he does have electoral talents. Boris Johnson is an opportunist of the highest order, but he's really intelligent. I hope he is. I feel the Tories can do much better than Theresa May, says Jenny, who's texted in from Leicester Square outside the studio somewhere. Boris was sending a strong message to Remain and Leave that the money will be spent after Brexit, and he fears Gove. I don't think he does fear Gove. He may fear Gove's dagger, but he doesn't fear Gove standing for leader. Michael, I don't think, would ever do that. Boris could and should have picked up the baton when he had the chance. Theresa May won't deliver Brexit, and Boris knows it, says David. David, there may well be something in Boris's thinking, very much as the same as Jacob Rees-Mogg has said, that all these millions of people voted because they wanted something to be better, and it's got to be delivered. Stuart is calling from Putney. Good evening, Stuart.
Hi, hello. I don't know why people think he's so clever. He was a terrible mayor. He wasted billions of pounds on Garden Bridge, Boris Island.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a blundering foreign secretary. He's made some terrible blunders. He's lied during the Brexit campaign, sort of unnecessarily.
How's he lied, Stuart?
Well, he did with the 350 million.
He did say, if you look at the actual slogan on the bus, I think you can't call it a lie, but you can.
Disingenuous.
But okay, fine, all right, yep. So, but Stuart, he's intelligent because he speaks in Latin.
Yeah, I know. He's funny, but he's clever to be funny. But I don't think he's not intelligent for the country. He's going to help himself, but he's not going to help us. If you want someone to waste a lot of money on vanity projects, he's your man. But if you want someone to run the country, he's certainly not. I think of the two, I prefer May. I think she's probably. Yeah, I don't particularly like her, but I think she's probably dealt a very difficult hand, and she's probably doing the best she can. She's fudging her way through, which is probably the best policy, actually.
Is she strong and stable, Stuart?
I think, as I said, I think she's sort of fudging and getting her way through, and I think she'll probably survive, strangely enough.
Do you really think, Stuart, that at a moment when the government has been tasked by the electorate to carry out the biggest constitutional change for goodness knows how many years, centuries, that fudging your way through is sufficient?
Yeah, I think it's probably the best thing to do, actually, because I don't think many people want to care that much. I think 10% really care about Brexit, and the rest just turned up on the day and voted. So I think she's probably...
And are you, Stuart, are you a Tory voter?
No.
Right, okay.
But I'm not. But I wouldn't vote for Corbyn either. So,
oh gosh,
I think of the two, Boris is more divisive actually. So I'm not sure that he's an electoral.
I think he's very good, Stuart, at reaching out to the electorate. But I think within the party itself, he's incredibly divisive, and I'd agree with that. Stuart, I know, Stuart, I must move on. I thank you for your call. I'm going to go to Brian, who's calling from Stockton. Brian, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Nigel.
So is Boris the answer to the Tory party's dreams?
Well, what it is, Boris is Boris, isn't he? Yes, he's a bit of a loose cannon at times. I mean, what was worse than this about the 100 million was the other week when he said build a bridge,
Wasn't that bonkers?
Wasting money, Now, I don't think he is, at the moment, I don't think he is Prime Minister material. You asked a lad a couple of calls ago, would you rather have May or Boris Johnson? Would Boris Johnson win your election?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it all depends what deal that May, if the election goes that long, the general election, it all depends how May does with Brexit, doesn't it? She gets a good Brexit deal.
I tell you what, Brian. Phase 1 of Brexit's finished. Give her marks out of 10.
Oh, it's poor at the moment. I agree with you.
It certainly
is. 3 or 4. I agree with you there. But what we're saying is, you said that lad, would he win election? Would he have a chance against Corbyn than Theresa May? That's pie in the sky at the moment. It all depends how she does with Brexit, doesn't it? As you say, it's low at the moment, but we're going to have to give them something, the EU something. Now, I was going to ask you this, Nigel. We were giving them, say, 10 billion net.
Yep.
If we'd have stayed in the EU.
Mm-hmm.
Would you go along with this? If we could get a good trade deal, that's getting out of them, these two things, customs union and the other one, we can get out of them, would you pay to be in the EU X billions to get what we wanted, to get the trade with the rest of the world?
No, Brian, the point about free trade agreements is you don't pay a penny for them. And even this concept that the EU has been free trade is nonsense because we've been paying a net 10 billion a year. Brian, got to love you and leave you. I've got a quick... Stephen, a new caller from Edinburgh. You've got 30 seconds, Stephen. I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
No, hi, Nigel. All I wanted to say was that I didn't think that Boris Johnson would actually be a better choice. For me, neither Theresa May nor Boris Johnson is really what is needed for the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is primarily quite Eurosceptic. And for me, and a lot of my friends and colleagues, because I'm an activist, a Conservative activist, and for me it would be Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yep.
That would be the kind of person that we'd need to take the Conservative Party forward, somebody that actually believes in Brexit.
Stephen, do you know what? Thank you, and I'm sorry the time was very short. We're at the end of the show. I think it's impossible. It's impossible to turn the ship of state around by 180 degrees, which is what Brexit's all about, unless you actually believe in it. And I do think Boris believes in it. My view of Boris, I like him. I think he must be an absolute nightmare to work with as part of a team. He is divisive. He is difficult. But he does have a little certain something. Our Tory confessional earlier said he's like a rock star walking around the concert, and he is, and people know who he is. He would have a much better chance of beating Corbyn than Theresa May, in my opinion. That's what he's angling for. But sometimes, if you try too hard, you just don't get there. And today was an example of his friends pre-briefing ahead of a cabinet meeting, and it fell to dust. Bide your time, Boris. If you do that, you might. You never know. Just make it. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow at 7. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.